Hello and welcome to On Point. I'm Ruben Saenz. Campaigns like Dove's Real Beauty Sketches have brought the issue of body images to millions of YouTube viewers. The campaign shows people who are not happy with the way they look, but who don't see themselves accurately. Some experts say that this image distortion is linked to images in the media, many of which are altered to sell more products. Some CSUN students say they do have issues about their own body image.
I'm always looking for other easier diet pills. I mean, I do work out every day, but you know, you always want to be that skinny, beautiful Victoria's Secret model, really.
Comfortable with my body.
Oh, really?
Yeah. I don't think I'm fat or skinny. I'm just average.
On Point's Natasha Arango has more on the story.
Thanks, Ruben. Today on our show, we have Cal State LA psychology professor Ramani Durvasula, who also has recently published her book entitled You Are Why You Eat. We also have Dr. Veronica Stotts, who is the coordinator of the CSUN Joint Advocates on Disordered Eating program. Now, my first question would be to you, Dr. Durvasula. Can you please describe some of the key points that you cover in your book that reflects how women's attitude towards food reflects their attitude and their aspects of their personal lives?
Absolutely. The one thing that women, and I think men too, but women in particular have learned, is to use food for everything but what it's designed for. And one of the core bases of the book is that most women a long time ago stopped listening to themselves. Instead, what they listen to is other people, how they should look, how they should eat, that they should eat to please, that they should live to please, as well as being very driven by fear. What if I don't look this way? What if I don't succeed? What if I don't do this by a certain date? And finally, the fairy tales we're raised with, happily ever after, I gotta have the right guy and all of that. All of those things drive into leaving people sort of very emotionally fragile, and they'll often use food as a way to reward themselves, to numb their pain. They use it for all kinds of psychological purposes. At the end of the day, food is designed to nourish us, not take care of our psychological needs. So that's what the book really gets at, how women and men, how everyone use food to soothe things that they really shouldn't be doing, and then break that relationship.
Okay. And my next question to you would be, is that I'm aware that you battled an eating disorder in your past. And I was wondering, what is it like, or what was it like for you during that time?
I mean, I think what I want almost to change it to disordered eating. And I think I still struggle with issues around food. I think I used to weigh over 200 pounds. I lost 85 pounds, okay? That took me 17 months to do. And it took me to have a lot of psychological things go down in my life and say, I'm using food for something it's not supposed to do. Got the weight off, have very healthy habits now. But ultimately, when I'm having a tough day, food's my go-to. For someone else, it might be a cigarette. Someone else, it might be a drink. For me, it's food. And it really requires having to talk yourself through and come up with a new relationship. But I think the problem is that people think that once I lose the weight, my life is going to be absolutely wonderful. And it's just going to be moonlight and roses and angels flying around my head. And everything's going to be great. I can wear a bikini. It's fine. All the problems are there that were always there. So now you have a new life, maybe a new body, the same issues. And so for me, what I see is that food continues and probably always will be a struggle, that there's not going to be a moment that you lose 60 pounds and say, I've got it all figured out. I'm all about kale and chicken now. You're still going to want the burgers. How do you get through those moments?
Okay. So what would be some of the alternatives that one could take that suffers with those types of eating disorders?
I think anybody who is suffering from a frank eating disorder or disordered eating, that they're binge eating or they're doing things to compensate, for example, they're throwing up or they're exercising excessively, or people who are starving themselves in the means of losing weight, number one, have to get professional intervention. This is not something one does on their own. And I think it's really key to get it out of the shadows. I think the great thing about CSUN is that you have a program that actually takes this on that you're going to be talking about. But I think it's to get professional help. And then I think it's also about shifting your thinking about food, but the most important thing is learning to accept your body as it is, because that's the key. In any kind of an eating disorder or disordered eating pattern, what we see is that a person wants to be something that they're not. They want to be thinner or they want to be different. If we can learn body acceptance, then can create a more healthy, normalized relationship with food.
Okay. And what were some of the fears that fueled the excessive eating habits that you had during that time?
I mean, for me, I think part of it was very cultural. I came from a very traditional Indian family. There were very traditional rules on board, and I felt like I wanted to break some of those rules. I was dismantling a relationship, I had children, my career wasn't going the way I wanted. I wanted to make a lot of changes, and that meant taking on disapproval, and I was terrified of that disapproval. So instead of facing that disapproval, what did I do instead? I ate. And so I think that every one of us, I mean, there's the standard fears. I'm going to be alone, I'm going to die, I'm going to get sick. But every one of us has also what I consider irrational fears. Everybody's not going to stop liking me because I make a career switch. But those kinds of things can hold us back. And then when we're living a life that's not authentic, that's not real, that's when we use food to distract us from, honestly, what I think is our real path.
Okay. And what was the turning point like where you felt that you needed to make a change in order to leave that behind and start new and start fresh?
The turning point for me was a very interesting and significant one. It's very personal. At the time, I had a 2-year-old daughter who got very, very sick. And she, I mean, so sick, she was hospitalized for quite a long time, and we were not sure how things were going to go. And it was at that time I did some soul searching. I thought, golly, this is fragile, and what am I doing? Go for the dream. My goodness, I could have my daughter taken away from me. If it can go that quickly, what the hell am I doing with my life? Why am I not pursuing my dreams? What was the worst thing that was going to happen? I would fail. What were people going to put up billboards if she failed? No, none of that was going to happen. And so it was my wake-up call. But because I didn't have the courage to change my career or change my marriage or do all the big things I needed to do, instead I had become quite heavy. I looked in the mirror, I thought I weighed 160. I was over 200 pounds. I thought, when did this happen? I thought, I can't fix these other things, so let me try the whole weight loss thing. I did it secretly because I was terrified if anyone found out I failed, that somehow that would be a bad thing. So I didn't tell anyone. I literally just changed what I ate. I added a little bit of exercise, and within 6 weeks, 10 pounds was gone. And then I thought, oh, this is actually going to work. And then I got healthier, but it took something as big as my daughter getting sick. My goal through my book, You Are Why You Eat, is that people have that wake-up moment, not because of a catastrophe, but because they wake up tomorrow and say, I'm going to make a change.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. Now, my question to you, Dr. Stotts, would be, what is JADE? What is that program about? What do you guys cover there?
JADE stands for Joint Advocates on Disordered Eating. It's been here at CSUN for 17 years. It was started by my predecessor named Ellen Mayer, who was a staff counselor at UCS. And it was actually one of the first programs of its kind in the country in college campuses. And so what JADE does is it's students educating students about issues like eating disorders. So how do you recognize the signs and symptoms? How do you help a friend? But we also talk about disordered eating and the full spectrum and what that means, dieting, fad dieting. We talk a lot about media literacy. So what does it mean to be more critical of ads? We show a lot of these Dove type ads or YouTube videos and things like that show the whole photoshopping process, make people more aware of it. And things like that. So it's really a group of students educating other students. We go into classrooms. We also do 2 main events every year, one of being Love Your Body Week. So that's in October, and it's just events about, just as it says, loving your body. And then Eating Disorder Awareness Week is a National Eating Disorder Awareness Week the last week of February every year. And so we do a ton of outreach, we table, we do a lot of different educational events. We show videos like misrepresentation, just to educate the community. It also helps just to kind of break open something that is so stigmatized and it isn't talked about in this way. And kind of just a lot of, not all, but some of the JADE members come in having suffered from disordered eating or eating disorders in their past, or having been, pretty much everyone's been affected by it in some way. And so a lot of them share their personal stories and just kind of break it open, like, let's talk about this and let's have some frank conversations about this, and in classrooms and on campus. And so we've educated thousands and thousands of students about eating disorders.
Okay. And why do you think that the peer-to-peer communication amongst them helps them out and is a better outcome for them to find a resolution?
I think kind of what I was saying about it normalizes a little bit, especially when people are revealing things about themselves. You know, these are students that maybe look just like them, that came from families or communities or high schools just like theirs, and who are kind of just being open about it and talking about it in a really educated way. They're very well trained. We do 3 intensive days of training where I train them, but I think it's different when I, as a, psychologist, come in and talk with them. That's that kind of expert role. It's a different environment, I think, when one of their peers comes in and kind of just breaks it down and is very real with them about it.
And can you provide some of the key prevention issues that deal with eating disorders in your program?
Key prevention issues, what do you mean?
Issues that, however you can assist the problem with, eating disorders if you're overeating or if you're not eating, or professional help that you can seek in order to find a resolution to that?
Certainly, yeah. I think the main thing we train our JADE peer educators on is that they aren't professionals and they aren't therapists. And so something they always share in every single presentation is about how to get help. So we kind of teach them, how do you approach a friend? So for example, a lot of students think, if their friend has an eating disorder, we should do an intervention. We should get all, 10 of their best friends together and kind of approach this person. Actually, the best way to go about it is one-on-one, and to really approach that person in somewhere in a safe space that's more confidential, and approach them and say you're concerned about them, and let them get some resources and help guide them to those resources. So for example, we kind of show them, how do you help get a friend to the right people in the right place? So we teach JADE to really talk about the resources. So University Counseling Services, I'm a staff psychologist there with an expertise in eating disorders and body image. So I basically tell them, send students to me. We also have a nutritionist on campus, Ellen Bowersfield, who's a registered dietitian, and she meets with students all the time. We have peer nutrition counselors. And there's, of course, community resources as well for students who have insurance. So we really help them to just recognize when their friends or themselves are in some trouble, and how do they get them to the professionals that can really help them.
Okay. Now, my question to you would be, how would you define eating disorders?
Well, eating disorders, that word specifically is really a specific kind of DSM classification. That's a manual that psychologists and some doctors use to classify mental illness. It's actually a pretty small percentage of the population that meets very specific criteria. And so we certainly see people on campus who meet that criteria, but it's a fairly small percentage. A much larger percentage meet what she was mentioning about disordered eating. And so that's a much broader category, which many of us fall into, and many college students fall into. So it's really eating on a spectrum. You have healthy, normal eating, and you have eating disorders, which is a small kind of specific criteria, and then you have this whole gradation of disordered eating, which a lot of people fall into.
Okay. Now, these questions would be for both of you.
Sure.
And I will start with you. So the question is, what may be some of the reasons why women view their physical appearance less accurately than others do? Why do you think so?
I think it's a series of messages that women start getting as girls. Okay, because remember, children do as we do, not as we say. So when they see mom sort of primping in the mirror, am I fat? Guess what they learn real quick, and that's from mom. Then you look at the litany of advertising and programming and magazines, and it's nothing but, it's just a front-on attack on little girls. And there is research documenting the fact that girls as young as 7, 8, sometimes 6 years old are commenting on their bodies, do I look fat in this? And they're babies, basically. And so it starts young. And then it's this sense of, I don't measure up, I'm not good enough. Now, that could come partly from family of origin, it could come partly from these media messages, but it all ends up becoming a perfect storm. 90% of women in the United States are dissatisfied with their body in some way. And you can't tell me 90% of women are wrong. So that's just sort of, that's where we start from. And it comes from a lot of different places. But the bottom line is that it can really go to that dark place of people doing some pretty dangerous thing with food and eating behaviors.
What are your thoughts?
I definitely agree. I mean, it's a way women are, and girls are socialized from a very young age to really think that their worth is based on how they look. So whether that's from messages they were told by their family or their culture, whether it's from media images. So, we have these images that are just consistently photoshopped so that they don't even look like the original model. But young girls aren't able to say, like, be critical of that image and say, oh, well, that's clearly, you know, they took 2 inches off her thighs and they took off all her moles and her blemishes and things like that. They're not, they just think that that woman looks like that and that they are supposed to look like that because that's what media teaches them. So I think it's an issue of socialization, and it's a misrepresentation of how we are supposed to measure our worth, and that it's not about our brain, it's about how we look, and we're taught that from an extremely young age.
Okay. On that note, I was wondering, what are both of your thoughts as to why you think that women can be their own harshest critics? We can start with you.
I think that in some ways, you know, a good, you know, good offense is a good defense, and I think in some ways there's so much fear and hurt around how is the world going to measure me. And again, to Dr. Stotts' point, it's this idea that our sense of worth in our culture comes from how we look. And what we're being compared to is always going to be far more because it's artificial. It's almost the equivalent of a painting. I think the average magazine model picture, it's a constructed image. So we're never going to measure up to that. And so I think that's where that constantly comes from, that you're never going to be thin enough, you're never going to be tall enough, you're never going to be young enough. And so that never enough, I think, is what definitely drives that. And I think it just doesn't go away, and it gets worse over time. And unfortunately, these images are here to stay, so we've got to teach people a different way of consuming the images. If we think we're going to make these images go away, we're nuts. They're not going anywhere. So it's almost like if you think dessert's going away, it's not. You just got to learn how to eat a forkful of it. It's the same thing.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it's the way, the lens in which women now see the world. I mean, they're taught to, for example, the way advertisements are, they make you feel bad about yourself, and that makes you want to buy their product. And so if Hydroxycut teaches you, or whatever, you know, teaches you that, you know, you're supposed to look a certain way, and then you're going to be more likely to buy into that product. So, you know, the media really feeds into it, unfortunately, but it becomes this way where if you grow up hearing the same messages over and over that you're not good enough, you really start to believe those messages, and that's the image that you view yourself.
Beauty is $1 billion business.
Yes.
That's what it comes down to. And if you look at the average magazine cover of a woman's magazine, probably 60 to 70% of the headlines are telling women they don't measure up in some way. And that would be one magazine, and there's dozens of them anywhere. So I think that that's really what it comes down to. We are trying to fight against a business that is so big that it's got to start with the individual woman on her own, looking in the mirror and seeing the radiant beauty that she is, inside and out.
And it's increasingly happening with men. So there's been a huge
Absolutely.
burst in the last 10, 15 years in men's magazines as well. And so now you're seeing the rate of men's body dissatisfaction going up as well. So,
And what do you think the difference is in between the portrayal of women and men?
in the media?
In the media, yeah. What do you think? What are your thoughts about that?
Oh, well, there's some basic differences in
supposed to
gender
look
in
like?
terms of what the ideal is supposed to look like. So for men, it's much more about weight gain. So there's a lot of studies about the numbers of, you know, messages in magazines where for women, it's all about losing weight, losing inches, you know, smaller everything. Where for men, it's all about bulking up, and you see things like what's called bigorexia and things like this overworking out, which happens in women as well, but it overwhelmingly more happens with men. So that's the biggest difference. Men are taught to have this kind of perfect V body shape, to have the big shoulders, the big arms, the tiny waist, the washboard abs, all of that. Whereas women, of course, you know, have this very thin ideal, large breasts, etc. So there's a lot of gender differences there.
Okay. And do you think that the media takes advantage of women's insecurities, or do you think that they create them? Or both.
Not only
One
do
or
they
the
take
other, or
advantage, it's like they have spun it into gold. They know that the sense of how we look, is the ultimate vulnerability. And if you go for vulnerability, you're going to be able to sell something. And so they absolutely know that. And really, by using unrealistic images so consistently, they really do play on that sense of insecurity and even perhaps sense of fear. And I mean, it's the ultimate advertiser's tool, right? Play on someone's fear, and they're going to buy something to take that fear away. So you better believe they take advantage of it. What's bothersome to me as a a psychologist is how young they start. They're starting to go after younger and younger girls with this advertising, right down to lingerie for children. That's just downright abusive. And so what happens is that there was a time when a child would sort of blithely go along and be fine and start maybe struggling with some of this stuff later in life. We are now seeing very young children deal with this. This is becoming part of their identity. And I have to say, I think both of us would say as psychologists, this is pretty scary to watch because this stuff is so entrenched that the eating disorders are now onsetting at younger and younger ages. So they're doing more and more harm to their bodies.
At really critical age, developmental periods.
Exactly.
Yeah, it's scary.
Okay, can you define the terms body image and warped views?
I'll start with body image is in many ways how one views their body. And the fact of the matter is that one would say, well, if a person's very slender, they must have a good body image. Think again. It is very much a distorted space. It is amazing how often a person could look at themselves and have an entirely distorted sense of who they are. I mean, that's often the core, obviously, of an eating disorder. A very, very almost overly slender woman viewing herself as still being heavy, so she still has to take weight off. So body image is something that comes over our lifespan, what we're told about our bodies, what we're told by the world about our bodies, how we feel about our bodies. That's why it's so important, I think, for girls to move their bodies a lot so they feel in command of them. But that's what it is. And honestly, it's not connected to how a person looks. There are people out there who have sort of the perfect body and they still struggle with image issues. And there's people out there who would not suit sort of society's idea of an ideal, and they think, I look like $1 million. Body image starts up here. It has nothing to do with what's down here.
Yes, I agree. I do a group called Body Esteem Bootcamp at University Counseling Services, and it's a psychoeducational group that's all about increasing body esteem, so kind of self-esteem about your body image. And we talk about all of these same concepts, the idea that body image is actually something in your mind. If you can look at yourself with this very non-critical lens and just say, what do my legs look like? What do my arms look like? We never do that. We look at ourselves with these very distorted goggles based on media, based on family, based on, this self-talk that we have about ourselves, that, how we look really, or how we think about ourselves really has nothing to do with how we actually look and the reality of that.
Okay, and do you think that family and peers have a huge impact on the way that we view ourselves? Whether they tell us that, we need to lose a little bit more weight, we need to look a certain way, and there's people that do listen to those types of, comments, and it affects them internally. So do you think that they have a heavy impact, aside from the media as well?
I think our social networks, in my book, I talk about this concept of stakeholders. I often give as a fundamental lesson we learned at the table was clean your plate. Okay, if you eat to please me, I made this for you, eat everything on your plate, show me you love me. Okay, it's one of the fundamental food lessons we get. From there, it's look the way I want you to, do what I say. I mean, we're very influenced. I think girls, more than boys, are influenced in some ways by these social spheres around them. I think, though, that there's a dark side and a bright side, though. Many times, once a person really does develop sort of these negative body images, all the support from the world of their peers and their friends and their family around them often don't bring them out of it. So I do think that family can be a very influential moment. In fact, one thing I do talk a lot about is what was your food moment? I'd say most of the patients, most of the clients I work with would be able to trace one moment, whether at the table or someplace else, where someone called them out on their appearance, and they still remember. I work with 65-year-old patients who can remember that day when they were 12, when their mom says, I don't think you should have that second piece of pie, after doing the whole Clean Plate Club to them a few years back. You see what I'm saying? They have that moment and they say the whole game turned that day. That's very much the influence of these sort of stakeholders in your life that can really influence your sense of body image and your relationship with food. I imagine that's been your experience with the folks you've worked with.
Oh, yes, definitely. I mean, like you said, something they heard in second grade, one comment from a teacher will stick with these, 18, 20-year-olds, however many years later. That one comment was a turning point for them, and something that they do not forget, whether bullying, whether they were called certain names, all of that, something that just mom made a side comment about something is so impactful. So, children take in these messages. They're like sponges, and these messages they get become part of their self-talk, and then they can't distinguish that voice from what was mom's voice. You know, they just say, I'm worthless, I'm fat, I'm overweight, I should not be allowed to eat this. And so it just becomes part of their daily talk that they're telling themselves all day long. And so completely, I mean, it's such a complex issue. Media is certainly a part of it, but peers and family are another huge part of it.
Okay. Now, what do you think are some of the healthy alternatives that someone may use to improve their body image rather than resorting to diet pills that have long-term side effects?
I think one thing I often say to anyone is that to be healthy at any weight, okay? Just to celebrate your body today. I have countless clients who've said, once I lose 40 pounds, I'll get a new dress. I'll say, and I don't believe in shopping. I'm saying, get a new dress today. I want you to enjoy the body you find yourself in. The other thing is to move that body, see what it can do. And you don't have to go out and train for a marathon. It can be yoga, it can be hiking, but something to show you that this thing is this beautifully engineered machine, and really grow to sort of love it, take care of it, nourish it with healthy things. Again, when you put healthy stuff in, over time, you're going to become more and more invested in doing so. In essence, it's treating yourself with respect through exercise, through motion, through enjoying yourself today, and to really catching yourself when you're doing that kind of negative self-talk. I mean, as far as even putting little rubber bands on their wrists, snap your wrist anytime you go after your body, or a friend will do it for you. Anytime you say, do I look fat? Snap. You've got that kind of negative self-talk becomes a way of life. It's pulling back from that, again, celebrating yourself at that way, and then let health follow. Make it less about the weight, make it more about the health.
I completely agree. Again, with Body Esteem Bootcamp, I teach a lot of these principles. One of our weeks, we talk a lot about mindful eating. And so this is the idea of getting away from calories or any of that and becoming more in tune with your body's messages about when is it hungry, when is it full, what is it craving. And there's a lot of research out there. If you start eating this way, it's sometimes also called intuitive eating. Your body will just naturally find its set point. So this idea, if you just focus on health, get enough sleep, move your body, eat when you're hungry, stop eating when you're full, be in tune with what your body needs at any given moment. Just treat yourself well, spiritually, emotionally. You know, your body will find exactly where it's supposed to be.
Okay. And to end with that, I have a last question for you both. What do you think is the primary way that we can learn to love our bodies?
Sure, I'll start. She had already mentioned self-talk, and I think it's something that we've talked about a lot, but I think it's coming from a place of just loving yourself and being more critical of, you know, this loop in all of us have loops in our head that we maybe don't even notice or pay attention to, but what are you telling yourself? Are you giving yourself messages that you would tell your best friend, you know, or are you telling yourself things that you would never tell your loved ones? And so being more critical of those, being more realistic with yourself, and loving yourself more.
And I'd say start today and imagine that you were your own child, and think about how you'd feed your own child, and before you put something in your mouth, feed yourself that way. So it can start today. Listen to your voice, listen to your instincts. You know when you're hungry, you know when you're full. This has all the answers. Listen to it, love it, celebrate it, and start today.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
That's all the time we have for today. So I want to thank you, Dr. Durvasula and Dr. Stotts. Thank you very much.
We would like to thank you for tuning into On Point. If you would like to see more, you can follow us on Facebook by searching CSUN On Point, and follow us on Twitter at CSUN On Point, all one word. This show also appears on our website at csuntvnews.com, or catch us on LA 36 every Sunday at 4 o'clock. For all of us here on Point, I'm Ruben Saenz.